For decades, the United States, Israel, and Iran have been locked in a kind of shadow war. But what happens when that war finally steps out into the light? We're going to break down this incredibly complex rivalry and explore what a direct conflict would mean for, well, for the entire world.
It's the one question that keeps military strategists and world leaders up at night. And I mean, forget about the proxy battles and the covert strikes for a second. We're talking about an all-out, direct fight between three of the most powerful and technologically advanced militaries in the Middle East.
And here's the wild part. When you dig into the strategic analyses and the intel reports, there's actually a surprisingly clear path to how this open war could start. So we're going to walk through a very plausible future flashpoint, a scenario built by experts that shows just how fast things could spin out of control.
So let's just dive right in, right into the middle of the action. Now, this isn't a prediction, okay? It's a war-gamed scenario based on the real-world capabilities and strategies of all sides. Welcome to the War of 2025.
It all kicks off with a massive Israeli strike, codenamed Operation Rising Lion, aimed right at Iran's nuclear program. Fast forward a few months, and the U.S. jumps in, escalating the conflict big time. In response, Iran's most powerful proxy, Hezbollah, opens up a second front from Lebanon. But the final trigger? Israel takes out a top Iranian naval commander. And that's when things really hit a boiling point.
Iran's response is just overwhelming. In less than a single month, they unleash thousands of drones and ballistic missiles. We're talking nearly 4,000 drones and over 1,600 missiles aimed at Israel, U.S. bases, and their allies. This isn't a skirmish. This is a full-scale, high-tech, modern war. So how on earth has Iran been preparing for a fight like this?
Well, Iran's entire military philosophy is built for this exact moment. They call it the axis of resistance, and it's a strategy designed from the ground up to counter the overwhelming technological superiority of the U.S. and Israel. Instead of trying to fight a conventional head-to-head war they know they'd lose, they use asymmetric tactics. Think unconventional methods, proxy armies, and missile swarms. Let's break that down.
This quote from U.S. intelligence really hits the nail on the head. For years, the whole goal was to use these proxy groups to apply pressure, to gain leverage, all while maintaining plausible deniability. You know, the ability to say, hey, it wasn't us. It lets them poke the bear without getting mauled. But in our 2026 scenario, that line gets crossed, and it gets crossed hard.
And this is the network that makes that whole strategy possible. From Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is a massive force, all the way to the Houthis in Yemen. What's so important to get here is that this isn't just a list of friends. This network fundamentally changes the nature of the battlefield. It creates a war with no clear front lines, no borders, giving Iran strategic depth and the ability to fight on multiple fronts at the exact same time.
So how do these groups get so deeply embedded in their home countries? It's what analysts call the state-within-a-state model. See, groups like Hezbollah, they aren't just militias with guns. They build hospitals, they run schools, they become legitimate political parties. They weave themselves right into the very fabric of a country, which makes them incredibly, incredibly difficult to root out.
Okay, so that's Iran's strategy. But what about the other side? The U.S. and Israel are running a completely different playbook. It's called the doctrine of deterrence. Their whole strategy is to prevent attacks in the first place, through just overwhelming technological and military superiority, all backed by surgical, secret, covert operations. This slide really lays out the fundamental clash of ideas. On one side, you've got the precision of air power, sanctions, and spies. On the other, you've got the sheer resilience of proxy warfare, regional influence, and swarms of cheap but effective drones and missiles. It's a classic matchup of a Leviathan against a Hydra.
Now let's really unpack how an operation like Rising Lion would actually work, because it is way more complex than just jets in the sky. As you can see, it starts with special forces sneaking into Iran to set up shop. Step 2, they decapitate the command structure with targeted assassinations. Then, step 3 is all about cyber warfare, blinding Iran's air defenses. And only then, after all that, do the jets and missiles actually strike. It's like a symphony of destruction.
And this quote from the source analysis just drives that point home. Air superiority isn't just won in the air anymore. It's won by highly coordinated special forces on the ground, operating deep behind enemy lines before the first bomb even drops. Okay, so Why does a war thousands of miles away actually matter to you? Because a conflict like this doesn't just stay in the Middle East. It sends a massive shockwave through the entire global economy. And it all starts with one number.
$112. In this scenario, that's the price for a single barrel of oil. When war breaks out in the Persian Gulf, energy markets panic, and the price you pay at the pump, no matter where you live, goes through the roof. And the reason for all this panic comes down to one single vital waterway.
This is the jugular vein of the global energy supply. Think about it. About a fifth of the entire world's daily oil supply has to pass through this tiny little waterway. So when Iran decides to weaponize its control over the strait, the global economy can grind to a halt. And here's exactly how they could do it. First, they could create a kind of toll booth, forcing ships to pay for safe passage. Then, and this part is a huge deal, they could demand payment in Chinese yuan, which is a direct challenge to the US dollar's dominance in the world. Finally, they could just effectively close the strait entirely, cutting off key oil exports and triggering a full-blown global energy crisis. But here's the thing. Even after the bombing stops and the missiles are put away, the war isn't really over. It just enters a new, and in some ways, more dangerous phase. This is the aftermath, a new kind of Cold War in the Middle East.
The axis of resistance goes into a period of what analysts are calling strategic dormancy. Now, it might look like peace from the outside, but it's not. It's a deliberate pause. The whole network just goes quiet, focusing on rebuilding, rearming, and evolving for the next round of conflict.
And what's so interesting is how they rebuild. Financially, they shift to what's called a gray zone economy. Oil smuggling, cryptocurrency, making them way harder to hit with traditional sanctions. Structurally, the network becomes more decentralized, so there's no single head of the snake to cut off. And this whole new model is backed by great powers, Russia providing diplomatic cover at the UN, while China supplies the high-tech parts they need to rearm.
So how do the US and its allies even begin to counter this new, evolved threat? Well, experts recommend a total strategic shift. It's no longer enough to sanction a few individuals. You have to go after the entire financial architecture. It means building up local governments as real alternatives to the proxies and fighting a much smarter information war. The key takeaway is that the old playbook for this conflict, it's just obsolete now.
And so, this is where the scenario leaves us. The hot war might be over, but the conflict has just transformed. It's smarter now, it's more resilient, and it's more deeply plugged into the global system. This leaves us with a final and pretty crucial question. As this new, decentralized conflict starts to take shape, what on earth comes next?